Venezuelans begin 7 days of mourning for President Hugo Chavez. What does the future hold for the Bolivarian revolution? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Rattansi. Massive crowds gathered on Wednesday as the coffin carrying Hugo Chavez's body was driven through the Venezuelan capital. The announcement of his death on Tuesday followed 3 months of uncertainty, speculation and rumor as he battled with cancer in seclusion. The date of a new presidential election will be announced within 30 days. Chavez easily won re-election last October, and his preferred successor, Vice President Nicolas Maduro, currently leads in the polls. But he is no Chavez, and the opposition candidate Enrique Capriles is hoping to capitalize on that. Whether the various factions of the opposition can unite once again, though, is another question. Hugo Chavez leaves behind a country transformed from that he inherited. But did he leave the basis for a smooth transition of power? Gabriel Elizondo is in Caracas.
There's been a huge outpouring of support for Hugo Chavez today. This is really a historic day, the first day of Venezuela without Chavez. We're here in Plaza Bolivar where we've been all day, and there's been at times thousands of some of Chavez's most ardent supporters here. They've been in a very reflective mood, many times crying, hugging each other, sometimes chanting. As you can see behind me under that red tent, there's a TV set up there where they've been constantly playing all day Chavez's speeches, and people, as you can see, have just been intently watching that all day, and it really shows the power that this man had. Yes, he was very controversial to some might even call him a tyrant, but to many of the people here that are grieving, especially right here today, he was a hero. This is a country very much going through a grieving stage before they move on to the next stage, which is elections, but right now they're still just trying to come to grips with Venezuela in the post-Chavez era.
Joining me to discuss the beginning of the post-Chavez era in Venezuela are, from New York, Gregory Wilpert, the founder and editor of VenezuelaAnalysis.com. From Claremont, California, Miguel Tinker Salas, the author of The Enduring Legacy, Oil, Culture and Society in Venezuela. And here in the studio, independent Venezuelan journalist and political analyst Sonia Schott. Gregory Wilpert, first of all, much talk in a lot of the commentary we see around about the potential for instability, of even violent upheaval. Is there any sense that that might be imminent, or might it even be wishful thinking in some quarters right now?
At the most, I think that would be wishful thinking. I mean, ever since Chavez got re-elected in 2000, I think things in Venezuela have stabilized and normalized. Because the opposition has realized after the coup attempt and the shutdown of the oil industry that trying to overthrow the government by violent means or some other unusual means isn't going to work. And so Venezuelan democracy, I think, has stabilized, and so I don't foresee any real problem. The transition process is prescribed in the Constitution, and there's no reason to believe that the current government won't follow that procedure. Everything indicates that they will, and there will be elections in 30 days.
Sonia, is that your sense as well, that it might be suicidal to do this, especially after Capriles spent all last year saying, look, we've changed, we don't want to just stick a bunch of businessmen in and forget about democracy?
I think from the beginning, Chavez and the Chavez movement, but especially Chavez, shows he has the control of whole Venezuela. And that what the movement, the Chavez movement, is showing that they still have their control of the country. So this is that's why it's very important to show that there is a continuity of the project of Chavez in Venezuela.
Right, we're specifically talking about the opposition here. Are there forces within the opposition who perhaps won't listen to Capriles and the logic of Capriles, which is, let's not do anything rash, because we're trying to show that we have changed from the people who committed the coup in 2002?
Yeah, the thing is that the opposition right now is led by Capriles, but is Capriles the leader who will show Venezuela a different path a political path? This is the question. And I think they need time to show that and to build their own strategy, not to follow the game of Chavez has always put on the table.
Well, it might be helpful just to look at some of the main figures now in the transition process. Here are the three main people that most people are looking at then. Vice President Nicolas Maduro, of course, Chavez's preferred successor. He started out as a bus driver in Caracas. He rose through the labor movement to become Minister of Foreign Affairs. He met Chavez in the early 90s when he campaigned to get the young lieutenant then out of jail. Diosdado Cabello is the president of Venezuela's National Assembly. He's also the vice president of Chavez's Socialist Party. A military man, he fought alongside Chavez in the failed coup attempt of 1992 and helped to restore him to power following a US-backed coup in 2002. And Enrique Capriles. He ran against Chavez as the opposition's unity candidate in October. The 40-year-old came close to beating Chavez. Actually, not really. Actually, he lost to Chavez by a 10% vote margin. He governs the wealthy state of Miranda, which borders Caracas, and he was jailed during that 2002 coup for allowing protesters to lay siege to the Cuban embassy where government officials were hiding. Sonia, just to develop what you were saying, let's begin then with the opposition. I'm not entirely sure what you're saying. How united is the opposition right now behind Capriles without Chavez in place to unite against?
The question is not just only how united is the opposition, but how connected is the opposition to the people in Venezuela, not just only in Caracas. And it's like an icon to show how much support the opposition has in the capital, in Caracas. But it is important to show also the connection with the rest of the population in Venezuela. And I think this is how or where the opposition has to go to connect with the whole Venezuela.
Right. Professor Tinker Salas, and what's your sense of the opposition? How united is it? Will it be able to remain cohesive behind Capriles without Chavez?
Well, what fundamentally united the opposition was opposition to Chavez. With Chavez gone, we've already seen in the last 30 days a lot of jockeying around within the opposition, particularly whether or not Capriles would be the candidate. In the end, I think he will. But let's be clear, there are many divisions within the opposition. That includes very strong supporters of neoliberalism, very strong supporters of an effort to return back to pre-1998, and now Capriles Radonsky, who wants to claim to be the Lula of Venezuela and proposes to keep social programs and policies, but still doesn't have a new vision of the country. It's not just a matter of connecting with the people. The only way to connect with people is to actually have a different vision of the nation, a different vision of a social program, and not simply say you're going to continue the Chavez-era program. So I think that there's a fundamental issue here about two different perspectives, two visions of the nation, and two visions of the country.
And that's really interesting, Gregory Wilpert. Let's talk a little bit about the Venezuelan people, because they do tend to get left out of many of these discussions as people discuss Maduro and Cabello and Capriles. I mean, there's a sense that Capriles presented himself like that because the Venezuelan people do have a stake in this democratic process. They aren't simply, they haven't simply been bought off by Chavez with oil riches over this time. This is a very different electorate.
Yes, definitely. I mean, if you look at the participation rates when Chavez first got elected, I think electoral participation was around 65%. Now it's over 80% in the last elections. And of course the population has grown, and many more, and most of the people who are new to the electorate basically come from the barrios. They did tremendous voter registration drives in the poor neighborhoods of Venezuela, and they eased the whole process of voting. But not only that, they also gave people a stake in their neighborhoods by instituting communal councils throughout the country where people can acquire ownership of their own homes, of their own land that had been occupying for a long time, and where they have community doctors now and have a say in how those community clinics are operating and things like that. So they have a much bigger voice now, and that's of course something that that has, like you said, changed Venezuela forever, and will make it much more difficult for somebody to campaign against the Chavez program of a participatory democracy in Venezuela.
But are these very diverse groupings then, though, Gregory? I mean, is there any natural air amongst Maduro and Cabello and perhaps some of the other people within the Bolivarian establishment, though, whom they would naturally gravitate towards?
Well, I think that's why Chavez chose Maduro, because in many ways he is the most natural heir. I think for a while he favored, it seemed, Elias Hawa, and of course at another point he had favored Diosdado Cabello, but Hawa is more of an intellectual who doesn't seem to have that popular touch. He's an academic, whereas Diosdado Cabello comes from the military, and so he doesn't have that popular touch with Nicolas Maduro, who comes from the working class, who's a former union organizer and was organizing in the 1980s and 1990s a grassroots movement. He does have that common touch, and so of course that's why he is the most natural choice, I think, at least for the civilian sector of Chavez's supporters.
But Sonia, what we often hear from the opposition, and certainly a lot of media commentators here in the US as well, but Maduro, he doesn't have the charisma of Chavez. He doesn't have that base. That's why actually there is a weakness in which the opposition can capitalize on. Is that how the opposition sees it?
Well, the thing is charisma something that you can transfer to someone else? It's a legacy? No. So this is remain to be seen if Maduro can wear the shoes of Chavez.
But do you accept that argument, though, that this isn't simply about charisma, it's about actually an informed electorate who believe in the principles of what Maduro stands for? It perhaps isn't quite as important about personality. The personality politics isn't quite as important as it is sometimes represented.
Well, I am not sure. I am not quite sure what kind of principles, because always the speech of Chavez was very popular. He always said what the people wants to hear. So, and he was actually very lucky, because the situation, despite the economic situation in Venezuela right now, there are a lot of shortage of food and electricity and all these kind of things. But the prices of the oil were very high. So he was really very lucky. He has a lot of money to invest, not just only in Venezuela, but abroad Venezuela. So it remains to be seen how long Maduro can go forward with the project of Chavez.
Professor Tinker Salas, what do you make of that analysis?
Well, I don't think it's about charisma. I think the focus on Chavez is misguided. In fact, Chavez was elected because there was social and political discontent in the country. To simply keep looking at the figure of Chavez as sort of this messianic figure, and that everyone simply followed him blindly or because they were getting gifts, does not really speak to the fact that we have a changed electorate. We have an empowered electorate. We've seen the mobilization of multiple sectors of society in ways that we never have before. I mean, one only needs to look at where Venezuela was in 1998 and compare it to where it is today in 2013. So I think fundamentally it's not a matter of luck, it's not a matter of charisma. I mean, it's a matter of social policy, of action, of empowerment of social movements, of the inclusion of those who were left out of the national narrative of a rich oil-producing country on its way to progress and modernity, still with 60% poverty and with people living under dire consequences. And I think that's the reality that Venezuela faces. And I think it's not a matter of luck, it's a matter of policy, of action, and of empowerment and mobilization.
Gregory Wilpert, as we talk about the different factions, though, within the Bolivarian revolution itself, then, Maduro, Cabello, the business sector candidates, the oil sector, and so forth, and the military, how deep are these potential fissures, or can they unite behind a particular philosophy? I mean, is this something comparable to candidates jockeying in the Democratic Party for the presidential nomination, or is it something, or are there deeper fissures that again might lead to future instability?
Well, of course, the fact that Chavez I agree, first of all, with what Professor Miguel Tinker Salas is saying about the importance of the social movements and that the focus on Chavez is perhaps a bit misplaced. However, the fact that Chavez named Nicolas Maduro as his successor makes him, so to speak, the uncontested successor. It is unlikely that even though Chavez is not there anymore, that anybody will challenge that nomination of his. But having said that, of course, there are various factions within Chavismo, but I think they will hold together because the forces that pull them together or hold them together are actually stronger than the ones that are pulling them apart. That is, they realize that the only way that they're going to survive in a government is if they have a united front, if they stand together and don't start sniping. They know that as soon as they do that, they will lose their footing, they will become unpopular and possibly lose power.
But what if,
the opposition,
Maduro,
in the meantime, it doesn't have anything to lose.
What if Maduro loses the election, though? What happens then, though? Might we see those fissures come out?
Yes, definitely. But as long as he doesn't lose, I think they will hold together.
But I'm intrigued, though, whether there are, within these differences in opinion, I mean, whether there are real differences in development or in political policy that are encapsulated in saying, well, Maduro is more of a civilian guy, Cabello is more of a military person, we have the business folks. I mean, what fundamental difference, how different would Venezuela look under each one of these particular figures?
Well, I think that
I think fundamentally it would look very
actually
different.
wouldn't.
Sorry, Gregory first, sorry.
So I think it varies because the thing is that it depends actually more on the political direction and not so much the faction. That is, Maduro is considered to be more left of center, whereas Cabello more right of center, and so that would make the bigger difference than the fact that he comes from the military. That's my opinion. Of course, he will have certain loyalties, certain clientele, but on the other hand, just the very fact that they know that they have to be united will mean that they have to serve all of their constituents, but there's more of this left-right thing going on, I think, rather than a factional issue.
Professor Tinker Salas.
Well, I think fundamentally what has changed with Chavez's passing is that the dynamic of power changes, because before the opposition was united in their disdain for Chavez. So to that extent they closed ranks. Here we're going to have the opposite effect. Absent Chavez, the PSUV and the left will need to close ranks to confront the opposition. So I think the dynamic of relationships changes, and it behooves then the PSUV, the Chavistas, and the left in Venezuela. The criticisms are obvious. They're criticism of bureaucracy, the criticisms of the change and the reform not happening sufficiently fast enough, the changes of corruption. And let's not forget that in the last election, Capriles Radonsky actually won 6 million votes, more than any other opposition leader. That is really an important message for the Chavistas to remember, because if not, they stand to confront a united opposition in this present election, and they really do have to have responsibility and accountability to their base, to their position, and to their constituencies.
But it is often said, Professor, that this division, or these factions, are an indictment of Chavez's leadership style. But is this about Chavez, this division, or does it in some ways predate Chavez? It's just been the nature of Venezuela politics for some time.
But can you imagine if we found that the entire left was united? We would say it's monolithic. We would say it's dictatorial then.
Is there a caricature?
No, I think that what's... Yeah. I think there are political differences. There's the spectrum on the left includes all of the potential elements, from moderates to leftists to Marxists to Trotskyites, to all of them. So I think that's really what's embedded, in addition to nationalist military officers, to a population that is empowered and informed around African rights, African descendant rights, indigenous. So it includes all of that conglomerate. They were able to unite behind the figure of Chavez, and now with him absent, I think they recognize that their position in power depends on that continued unity.
All right, well, I think there, I'm afraid we have to leave it. Professor Miguel Tinker Salas, thank you very much. Gregory Wilpert, thank you. Sonia Schott, thank you as well. Now, joining me to discuss the economic legacy of Hugo Chavez are from Barcelona, Mark Weisbrot, co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, and from Chicago, Hal Weitzman, author of Latin Lessons: How South America Stopped Listening to the United States and Started Prospering, now Executive Director for Intellectual Capital at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Mark Weisbrot, first of all, there is a common theme in a lot of the reporting that things may seem calm now, but the economy is weak, and when that finally collapses, that's when all hell is going to break loose. Give us a sense of how the economic fundamentals are in Venezuela.
Well, you know, the opposition and the media, which relies on opposition sources, has been saying that for the last decade. And I think the last decade is the proper measure because, you know, for the first 4 years, and everybody, I think Hal would acknowledge this too, the government didn't have control over the economy because it didn't have control over the state-owned oil industry. And in fact, it was controlled by people who were using it to try and overthrow the government. It's kind of like if you had the Federal Reserve was run by, you know, far-right Republicans who were using it to try and sabotage the economy so that Obama wouldn't be reelected. Something like that, only much worse. So if you look at the last decade, which is since the government of Venezuela got control over its national oil company, there's only been 2 recessions. Well, there was one recession before they got it, which was 2002 and 2003, caused by the oil strike. And there was one when the world financial crisis hit. And so it's done pretty well in that time period. Per capita income has grown about 2.5% annually, which is pretty good, even compared to the rest of Latin America. And it's, of course, vastly better than what they had before Chavez. 20 years prior, the income for the whole 20 years, the income per capita fell by more than 14%. It was one of the worst disaster cases in a region.
But Hal Weitzman, when we ask for specifics from people who are looking at, who have a pessimistic view of the economy, they often mention inflation and debt and so forth. I mean, what's your assessment of those issues?
Well, I agree with Mark in one important respect, which is there have been numerous predictions over the years of the demise of Chavista economics. And, the fact is that Hugo Chavez did defy economic gravity, as it were, and those predictions never came true, and doomsday was continually averted. There has been an increase in borrowing, and China has certainly stepped in and increased its lending to Venezuela. Mark, I think, has done some research that indicates that Venezuela's overall debt burden is not terribly high when you compare it to some of the industrialized countries, particularly the European countries that are having problems at the moment. So, I think in general it would be foolish to predict that the Venezuelan economy is going to collapse anytime soon, but certainly something that you've seen not just in Venezuela but across South America with the economies is that they have increasingly been influenced by the global commodities markets. And it's been, Mark's right, that a lot of the indicators have been fairly good, so poverty and inequality have come down under Hugo Chavez, but they've also come down across South America, regardless of whether the government is right-wing or left-wing. I think the concern over Venezuela in terms of sustainability has always been about the commodity markets, and while oil remains above $100 a barrel, Venezuela has good revenues, even though oil production has actually been falling in the past decade.
Mark Weisbrot, perhaps you should answer that, especially because that is another theme, that much of the social spending is because of oil profits and it's not sustainable, and the oil industry, in fact, is in disarray.
First of all, it is true. I mean, Peru is a fair comparison in some ways, but not in others. I mean, it also was that Peru is almost the fastest growing economy in the region for a variety of reasons, and partly because their macroeconomic policy was successful. I don't think they reduced poverty quite as much as Venezuela, but they did. It was significantly reduced, and it is true that that's true across the region, although not so much. For example, Mexico has done terribly, both in terms of growth and poverty reduction. So there are other countries that haven't done as well. They didn't provide, the poverty numbers we're using is only cash income. And so Venezuela also provided free health care to millions of people. University enrollment has doubled, and many people with free tuition. They tripled eligibility for public pensions as well. The government has to do something. I mean, it isn't just a commodities boom. You have a change in macroeconomic policy. So last year, for example, you had a big stimulus program, and Venezuela was the 4th highest growth in the region because of the hundreds of thousands of housing units they built. Will they keep doing this? I think so. I hope so. I mean, and of course, when the economy grows fast enough and for a long enough time, the private investment kicks in as well, as it did in the boom from the expansion from 2003 to 2008.
Mark Weisbrot, thank you very much. Hal Weitzman, thank you as well. And what we're going to do is continue our discussion in the online version of the show. And on Thursday's program, we'll be looking at the regional implications of Chavez's death. But until then, that's it from the team in Washington, D.C. for now. So I'm with Hal Weitzman and Mark Weisbrot, and we're talking about Hugo Chavez's legacy. Hal Weitzman, I mean, that is the point there. It's easy to say, oh, look, the region is doing well, but it does take policy, and it takes someone like Hugo Chavez, especially in a country like Venezuela, where there are so many entrenched interests, trying to prevent that sort of policy from being instituted.
Yeah, but the point is that you've had different policies in different countries, and everybody's grown. That's kind of, I mean, Mark gave the example of Mexico, which I agree is not a good comparison. I was talking about South America.
Right.
So within South America, forget Central America, which hasn't experienced the commodity boom in the same way. In South America, governments of the right and the left have grown. Now, obviously, governments have done a range of different things. In Peru, the example I gave earlier, they basically got out of the way. And they saw, in fact, Mark questioned some of those poverty statistics, but they come from the government, those two governments' own statistics.
Hal, I think what we're trying to get to the bottom of is the constantly repeated statement that Hugo Chavez has run the economy into the ground, and he might have taken a different route from some of these other countries, but is that actually true?
Well, I mean, I think it's a mixed picture. I think that the media, including Al Jazeera, wants to push pundits into a kind of, he said, she said, handbags at dawn.
I didn't even realize the conversation was going to go this way. But we just want to know the truth.
And that's not the case. The fact is, it's much more subtle than the media want to portray. There have been some achievements of the administration. I pointed those out, but principally, and Mark did the same. We agree, essentially. Principally, the reduction in poverty and inequality. That has been an achievement. But there have been significant non-achievements. For example, the government has failed to increase oil production at a time when oil has been at historic highs, and that is a failure. That could have given it even more revenues to spend on those social programs. So more could have been done.
Is that incontrovertible?
I think that the government wasn't aiming to increase production because it wanted to adhere to the OPEC quotas. That's most of it. I mean, there's a lot of dispute about the measurement of Venezuela's oil production. You see different measures out there. So, I tend to think the government figures turned out to be correct, everything that I've read. And by those numbers, I don't think they've done badly. I mean, they want to increase more.
I think the government, hang on a second, Mark.
Go ahead, Mark. Just finish your sentence and then we'll get Hal back in.
I'm sorry. No, I think that, again, I don't think that's, they had enough, they're not trying to maximize, they made a deliberate, when Chavez was first elected, one of the first things he did was, he organized a meeting of the presidents of OPEC countries, the first one in 15 years. And it was deliberately to lower production, and they've been that way in OPEC since then. Overall, so I don't think they're trying to
Hal Weitzman, then it was a matter of policy,
production.
The oil production. I mean, that was in order to keep the price high and actually pay for the social spending.
That may be a matter of policy now, but I mean, I was with the Financial Times correspondent in South America in 2005 when PDVSA said its aim was to produce 580 million barrels of oil a day by, I think it was 2011. And so not only did they not achieve that, they reduced. So if it's a policy that's new to me that I've not heard of. As in terms of the OPEC quotas, that's kind of a red herring. The Venezuelan oil needs a lot of investment. The sector needs a lot of investment because of the type of heavy crude that they have in that country. And the fact is that the government in itself doesn't have the investment, and unfortunately, because of its policies, a lot of foreign investment hasn't materialized, and that's one of the key criticisms. And now it doesn't mean that all foreign investors have left; they haven't, but they haven't spent in the way that would increase the production of that oil, and that would have produced more revenues that perhaps could have reduced some of the lending and could have even increased spending on poverty reduction.
Do you want to respond to that, Mark?
Sure. Well, again, I don't think they're producing much less than what they wanted to produce, and we'll see in the future. I think they will get a lot of investment. I mean, they're one of the few major oil producers that actually has foreign investment in the oil industry. Mexico doesn't have it, and and the other OPEC countries don't have it. So, I think they will get more, and they'll produce more. as they want to.
What about this other criticism, Mark?
It hasn't been a problem for them.
That we often hear even from people on the
What's
left who go to visit Caracas, and they say, well, look, this is all very well and we love the social spending, but why does the infrastructure look like it's crumbling? Where's the oil money going?
Oh yeah, no, they have not invested. Oh, I agree with that criticism. They have not invested enough in infrastructure. That's absolutely true. I hope that they do that, but that's one of the shortcomings of the government. They haven't put enough into infrastructure, and I think, you know, they have other problems too. I mean, the exchange rate is a problem as well, and the management of the exchange rate system, and there are shortages. I mean, we know the problems because that's all you really read in the media. You know, if you read the press, I mean, you do a Nexus search, you can't find a positive article about Venezuela. It's almost impossible. It's almost all negative all the time. And so we're familiar with all of these problems. But the thing is that, you know, in spite of that, they've managed to deliver the goods in the ways that we, you know, both described. And I think those will be the challenges going forward, to fix the exchange rate system, to bring inflation down without causing a recession, and to invest more in infrastructure and promote manufacturing. I think those will be the economic challenges going forward.
Very quickly, Mark,
just to add to that.
Just very quickly, Mark, that he's not really a socialist at all, actually. That he still has a very close economic relationship with the US, for example. He preserved the capitalist structures. The rich elite still hold the economic levers of power and are simply getting richer. You know, he wasn't perhaps left-wing enough.
Well, I mean, all of these governments, left government, I mean, you know, you have Bolivia, you have Ecuador, they all have the banner of 21st century socialism, and Venezuela too, and people voted for that. And on the other hand, it is true that they're all social democratic countries in the sense, and they, you know, in that the state isn't as big as it is in, say, France or in some of the Scandinavian countries. It doesn't have as much influence over the economy as it does in those countries. That's true for Venezuela, and it's true for Bolivia and Ecuador. I think Ecuador has gone the furthest in terms of, you know, financial system reforms and the kind of things that are needed elsewhere. You know, this is a process. It's an experiment. When they started out, you know, they had the central bank independence was put into the Constitution, for example, which I think they later learned was a mistake. They have to, and they concentrated on, well, the first 4 years, of course, they were just concentrating on hanging on to power in the face of a coup and oil strikes and all the attempts to military overthrow, which is the strategy of the opposition. But after that, they concentrated on healthcare and education and food, you know, with the Mercal system. And so, but yeah, I think there's a lot more that they can do. I think the government has recognized, to their credit, that they don't have the administrative capacity to have more of a state-directed economy. And so they haven't gone that far.
Mark Weisbrot,
but of
we'll
course
leave it there because I think we're about to lose your satellite window, but thank you very much. Hal, I'll ask you just one last question then about the regional impact of Chavez leaving. There's a lot of talk about you know, who will take the mantle of Hugo Chavez in Latin America and so forth. I get the sense that your argument is, look, you can't just lump all these countries together. They're all very different. Is there a sense that question reveals a very simplistic understanding of what's happened in Latin America over the last 10 years?
Well, yes. As in any region, you know, it's like Africa. People think Africa is a country. South America is not a country, and each country in the region is very different, has different set of challenges, even though they may appear very similar from the outside. But there are general trends, and one of the trends that I wrote about in my book was resource nationalism. And resource nationalism, essentially the use of the economy for political ends, is something that has a long history in South America, and we saw a revival of that in the past decade. But Hugo Chavez didn't invent that. He was more of a symptom of that than a catalyst for it. So there are many other countries where you see the similar kinds of policies, not just on the hard left in places like Ecuador and Bolivia, but you see You see resource nationalism in Brazil, a much more moderate regime. You see countries like Peru and Chile, much more market-friendly governments raising taxes on foreign investors and that kind of thing. So this is much more of a continuum. Chavez was certainly on the left of that continuum, but he was not the leader of the movement. The first nationalization in South America in recent years was in Bolivia, not in Venezuela. So he, in some senses, was catching up to other people who are thought of as his acolytes.
Hal Weitzman, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And that's all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now.